All right, so if you're like me, you're probably standing or sitting out there wondering, why is this guy up on stage and not any of the 20 or 30 other people in Cleveland who could do this talk? Well, I've got two qualifications that I think are worth considering. Number one, as Thomas mentioned, yesterday was my birthday. I turned 69. So I've been around for a long time. Thank you. Qualification number two, which he also mentioned, is I asked. So I'm going to talk about how designers evolved and especially how we were affected by the computer. So you can see designers and people were almost the same, except designers have smaller hearts. So one of the things I'm going to talk about is how we can keep our head, our hearts, and our hands in balance so that we don't have to believe this thing we were told that our job is just to be a hired gun. So this is a quote by Brené Brown that I thought was really helpful. And so we need to keep head, hearts, and hands in balance. Well, in 1980, design was all about hands. These are the tools I used. So I sketched on paper. I used magic markers to color them in. I cut out pieces of type and pasted it onto cardboard keyline boards. It was very hands-on. So it was all about your head and your hands. But again, because I'm just a hired gun, the heart didn't really enter into things. But I started my own business, and I tried to bring my heart into things by looking for clients that were doing good things. And so this is some of the work I'm most proud of, even though none of it won any awards, but I'm hoping that it improved people's lives just a little bit. Well, this came along. All right, this is the original Macintosh. It had a glorious 9-inch black and white screen. You moved the mouse and lines appeared, cost $2,500. So I had to have one. In 1985, I moved into the computer era. And then this is what happened. So I pretty much stopped using my hands, but I used my head and I used my eyes constantly. And so this is kind of where things went. Of course, my heart still wasn't really much in the picture, you know, because that wasn't what we did. As you can see, I spared no expense on the graphics too. Other people, though, weren't really limited by that. So here's some names of people that did some really great work during the 90s. And they figured out a way to bring their heart into their work by doing things like designing crazy typefaces and this grunge style that design teachers like me really hated, but the students really loved. So they figured out how to make it work. What happened next then? Well, design evolved, and, whoops, are we stopped? I was going to say. Wow. All right. So design evolved, but I kind of stood on the sidelines, and every once in a while, I just dipped my toe into the water of what was called multimedia. But then in 1995, I went to this workshop and learned how to do digital video, and I fell in love. I loved making my own world appear on the screen. So I followed my heart, I followed my head, I followed my wife's advice, who said, hey, why don't you teach multimedia? And I went to grad school at age 50. 2 years later, I was teaching at Heron School of Art in Indianapolis. And then in 1999, I came back to Cleveland, where I taught at Tri-C for 12, 13 years. So at this point, my head and my heart were in the same place. I also started a website in 1999, and my goal was to have this online forum where designers from all over the world would discuss interactive media. The problem is I got almost no response. So my lively forum was really lonely. And I continued with that site for a few years and decided I needed to do something different. So again, I followed my heart. What do I care about? Well, art, design, education, and life in Cleveland. So I named my new website after the street that I lived on, West 32nd Street. And for 5 years, every day, I shared little pieces of my life via this website. I also sometimes linked to student work from the Tri-C students, and the really interesting thing is their websites often got more hits than mine did. So very sobering experience to realize that. Okay, so that brings us kind of up to now. I'm retired, have been for a couple of years, and I'm trying to keep this balance and mostly trying to bring my hands back into the picture, which lots of people are doing. So you may have noticed you've got letterpress posters, you've got handcrafted beer, small batch coffee. People are playing old-style pinball machines. So the idea is we're bringing our hands back. But what I found out personally is I'm still constantly struggling with, are people going to read what I do? Are they going to watch what I send out? Why aren't my videos going viral? Where are all my Twitter followers? Even though I've done a fair number of things, I'm still worried about it. So here's maybe the single most important thing I'm going to say today, I hope, which is I know that some of you sitting out there want to share your ideas and you want to share your thoughts. But you're worried, well, maybe there's nobody that's going to listen to it. Maybe I don't know how. Maybe I'm too old. Maybe I'm too young. Listen to your heart. Here's how hard it can be. It took me until I was 32 years old to get out on the dance floor. I was afraid to get out there because I was afraid I was going to look silly. One day, I don't know why, I did get out on the dance floor. I had a great time. I enjoyed it. And maybe I did look stupid. But at this point, I felt like, well, maybe I'm coming off as I'm this graphic design Yoda, and I've got all of this wisdom for you. I don't. I've got a lot of questions. I have to give myself a pep talk every time I take on a new project, every time I get up in a group like this. And so I've got this little pep talk that works for me, and I'm going to share it. I hope it helps you. Step number 1 is do it now. There's never going to be enough time. You're never going to know enough. It's not going to get easier when you get older. Do it now. So that's the first part and probably the most important part. Now, step 2 is do it as well as you can. I really believe that you should try and improve your craft. So keep learning, keep trying to do better, but pursue excellence. Don't pursue perfection. Because remember step 1, you've got to do it now. And step number 3 is do it again. Sometimes you're going to win, sometimes you're going to lose. The important thing is you learn from it. So now, my time is just about up, and I want to thank you guys for being here. I want to thank Thomas for saying yes when I asked, and I want to thank Joanne who stood by me through this evolution, which has been kind of up and down over the years. And as a holiday wish, here's what I wish for all of us. Be kind, be generous, and be happy. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I apologize I can't stand and talk to everybody afterwards, but I do have tickets to Star Wars, so. So my name's Zachariah, and I'm a visual and a verbal artist, so objects can be very loaded with meaning for me. And I'm not superstitious, I'm not a magical thinker, but I do find a bond between myself and specific things in my life, and I'm going to share a few of these with you. This is a ball of cotton. It's made of cotton. And my mother tells me that I couldn't sleep without it as a baby, and I'd hold it like a tiny pet, and I'd feel the soft fibers until I drifted asleep. If I live to be 75 years old, statistically I'll have spent 25 of those years sleeping. This is a band of cardboard. It's a recreation. When I was 3, I wore the same band of cardboard on my head every day for 2 months. One day when I was walking over a bridge, I put the band in the water and I waved goodbye to it, and I never talked about it again. It takes 2 months for cardboard to biodegrade. This is Mr. Macintosh. He's very small. I would carry him in my pocket everywhere when I was 5. He used to have a little hat, but it got lost somewhere along the way. As far as I can tell, he's an onion. Why did I connect to him? His eyes, his mustache, his demeanor, I don't know. If you don't cut a real onion, it can last for 3 months. This is a Disney World guidebook. I was 7, and after our family trip, I spent hours poring over the maps, and I drew every ride, every food stand, and garbage bin from memory. To this day, my most constant dream motif is me at a theme park. If you played all the copies sold of The Little Mermaid, it would play for 34 million hours. This is a book it pin. In the 80s, Pizza Hut would give you little star stickers for every book you read to put on your button, and if you filled your button, you got a free pizza. And I didn't like pizza, but I loved awards, so I would give my parents the pizza, and I would goad the waitstaff into complimenting me. Pizza Hut's been around for 57 years. This is a Star Wars action figure. I had 75. I'm an only child growing up in a neighborhood with no other kids, so action figures were like little friends I could line up, play with, and carefully pose around my house. I don't mean for that to sound sad. I loved it. 40% of kids have an imaginary friend between 5 and 7. This is a panel from Muppets Take Manhattan comic book. In the movie, there's a human character named Jenny who I had a huge crush on. I didn't have any photos of Jenny, so I would remember what she looked like from this comic. This actually is sad. The actress who plays Jenny is 51 now. This is a book of constellations. I would sit outside with my father and a flashlight, working through the book's little charts of the seasonal skies. When I was old enough to understand what a galaxy was, and then I saw another galaxy in the sky above me, it completely blew my mind. It takes a star's light 4 years to reach the Earth. This is a copy of Whitley Strieber's book Communion. It was a bestseller in 1987, and the book's cover absolutely terrified me. We did not have this book at my house, but the alien was a constant feature in my nightmares. Years later, I bought a used copy to visually remind myself that fears pass in time. Schreiber claims he was abducted for 6 hours. This is a puppet rabbit in a hat named Charlie. I bought Charlie from a magician when I was 12 and rehearsed endlessly in the mirror, learning the script that was included with the puppet. I would perform in nursing homes and little kids' parties, and I stopped when a friend made fun of me. Rabbits can live for 9 years. This is a copy of my Jedi journal, and it was a blank book and one of the only journals I'd ever kept for any length of time, on and off from 12 to 14. I wish I could reread it, but I tore out almost everything I had written at 16 because I was embarrassed by my past self. Yoda's supposed to be over 900 years old. This is a copy of the Bible. I went to church all through my adolescence and at one point read the whole book over the course of a year. It alternated between interesting, ploddingly boring, and outright surreal. It's probably been 15 years since I've last opened it. In Joshua, it says that God stopped the sun for 3 days. This is a self-portrait that my first girlfriend drew for me. I was 16. I carried this drawing in my wallet for years, even a year past when I broke up with her. I don't think I could have told you why. When you're young, maybe you should fix the car, but instead you set it on fire. We did it for 4 years. High school is 4 years. This is coffee. I started drinking coffee when I was 18 to wake myself up for an early morning job. At first with lots of flavored cream, and then sugar and cream, and then cream, and 1 year later, black. I've drunk about 6 to 7 black cups of coffee every day ever since. Caffeine has an effect of 3 to 5 hours. This is a Rapidograph pen. It's an artist pen that I used all through art school. I would draw almost every day for 8 to 10 hours. I learned the minute changes that the pressure from a hand makes. If you slave for untold hours, you get 1 minute that's clear and that's perfect. Archival inks will stay perfect for 50 years. This is a pair of headphones. When I lived in New York, I wore these with the consistency of putting on shoes. Without them, the world was noise, aggression, and bombardment. With them, you could pretend to have your own space and your own thoughts. If you played all the songs in my iTunes library, it would play for 4 months. This is my current cell phone. I used it to take all the photos of my stuff. It alerts me to texts, emails, push notifications, comments, updates, and likes. I spend what feels like a quarter of my day stooped over it. It's horrible and stupid and irritating, and I go into a blind panic if I leave the house without it. People check their phones 150 times a day. This is a Valentine that a person gave me on our first date. I thought it was charming, and I put it on my bathroom mirror so I could see it at the start of the day. After we broke up, I put it in a file of papers. It's a file that holds letters that bring me pain. But sometimes you don't want to forget pain. It's 57 days from today until Valentine's Day. This is a little animal made from fabric and corn seeds that my mother made when she was 7. I've had it in every room I've ever lived, and it stares at me with those round eyes unchanging. I always thought it was a monster's head with hard yellow teeth. Recently it occurred to me that it's an owl, but I'll never ask what the real answer is because some objects need to be a mystery. Thank you.
All right. Why is there a sailboat? My dear friend and professional bassist Rick Robinson once likened classical music to sailing. In classical music, we stretch and compress time, play with time to sustain and create tension in a series of waves. In non-classical music, if it were like a speedboat, quick, loud, exciting, and short, classical music would be like a sailboat using the laws of physics and a struggle in time in a unique way. Classical symphonies, sonatas, great works of music use sheer time to work out in great depth the captivated ideas of their composer. This is a unique feature in classical music, and classical music is anything, it's such a broad definition, but we're going to stick to the music of Bach specifically today, but just how big are some of the major works of classical music? The longest Bruckner and Mahler symphonies are 80 to 100 minutes in length. That's not your typical one-hit wonder on Cleveland's popular radio stations. The music of Bach and Beethoven, violin sonatas and solo pieces can be upwards of 30 minutes. Talking about Bach, born in Eisenach, Germany, died in Leipzig, 1,100 works of surviving music and 20 children. He was quite a prolific man in many ways. We'll just leave that there. And specifically with the music of Bach, we're going to be talking about the sonatas and partitas of Bach, particularly the D minor chaconne, a personal favorite of mine and sort of an epic piece that musicians and musicologists talk about, uses time in a very unique way. So for non-musicians in the room, it's totally cool if you don't use music. I'm going to be doing some demonstrating as we talk about the chaconne. For reference, the chaconne is also a part of the E major preludio from the E major partita. They're part of the same collection of works. It's this. So if that sounds familiar to you, same collection of works as the chaconne. The chaconne comes from the D minor partita, written between 1717 and 1720. It consists of 5 movements, the last being the chaconne. It's the allemande, the courante, the sarabande, the gigue, and then the chaconne. These are all French Baroque dances that composers set in that particular style to make the large collection of the partitas. Composer Johannes Brahms on the chaconne. You can read as I speak, but essentially Brahms lived 100 years after Bach, and for composers even today, we're still working through the music of Bach in very profound and powerful ways. There's something really foundational about people like him and Beethoven. The chaconne is consisted of a ground bass line. Sorry, that was the only thing I could think of. It just kept like pumping in my head while I was thinking, what about the bass? It really is all about the bass in the chaconne. It is a bass line from which all the other material in the piece is derived, and it's 16 minutes long, but it basically just starts with a 4-bar bass line. It's only 4 bars in length, and it outlines a harmonic progression. Everything else comes from, and I'll play the opening phrase of that for you now so you get an idea of it as we hear some of the other examples. So from that little clip, Bach launches into 16 minutes of variations, each one sounding completely different and unique. One variation to expand time in music is by drawing out the melody from the chords. And so the next example, you're going to hear the same harmonic chord progression as that theme, but it's going to sound totally different. It's not in chords anymore, it's in individual notes. Same harmonies, just stretched out. Stretching time in music can also involve something called arpeggiation. And if you play the piano, you had to play arpeggios for your awful piano teachers, or maybe they were amazing, who knows. But arpeggiation on a violin, literally from the Italian word to play the harp, arpeggiare, you're using a certain technique to stretch out the chords. Another technique for expanding ideas in music is to change the mode. So the D minor chaconne is in D minor. It's a very sad, dark key, and we relate major and minor keys to the feelings of happy and sad. And halfway through the chaconne that Bach wrote, it changes to D major. So essentially, the harmony structure goes from to. And as the piece nears the end, and by this time it's been going for 14 minutes, there's going to be the final opening restatement once more of that theme, and the arpeggiation in a different way creates a very expanded feel that builds to that finale. So again, the same harmonies, but they're expanded and utilized in a very different way than those chords. The final restatement of the theme is Bach's last hurrah in the piece, and it takes you all the way to the end, almost identical to that beginning, and it's like very powerful, powerful bookends. Again, talking about a piece by Bach that's over 20 minutes, and 6.5 minutes just doesn't do it justice, but hopefully you get a feeling for how classical musicians use time in a special way.